So you wanted to do a deep dive into presidential relationships. Getting into this material, it's like, almost like going behind the scenes of the most exclusive club in the world, the President's Club. We've got this fascinating article about Jimmy Carter's experience. And what stood out to me was how different his relationships were compared to other presidents.
It's not even just that they were different. It's more like he approached the whole idea of the President's Club differently. He had this incredibly close bond with Gerald Ford, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. I mean, Ford was the incumbent president that Carter defeated in the '76 election.
That sounds like a buddy movie or something.
Yeah.
They went on road trips together. Their wives were close. Carter has even said he's proud that historians view their relationship as uniquely close.
Yeah. What's interesting is that they had a lot in common personally. Both Navy backgrounds, 3 sons, strong Christian faith. Even their wives connected on a personal level. But beyond those shared experiences, you have to wonder how they navigated the political side of things.
Well, the article mentions that they loved taking these road trips, but they actually dreaded reaching their destination. They enjoyed the conversations along the way so much. It makes you wonder what they even talked about.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. I think those shared experiences probably helped form the initial bond. But it was their shared understanding of the presidency itself that really solidified it. Imagine the weight of that job, the decisions, the isolation. Who else could truly understand that burden but another president?
That's a good point. They could let their guard down with each other. No need for the political posturing or anything. And their bond was so strong, they made a pact to eulogize each other. Carter actually fulfilled that promise at Ford's funeral in 2007.
Yeah, it was a really moving moment. It really highlighted their genuine affection and respect. But that's just one side of Carter's experience with the President's Club, his interactions with other presidents. Well, they were often less harmonious, sometimes even contentious.
Yeah, the article described him as a bit of an outlier, even annoying to some of his peers. What was it about his approach that rubbed some presidents the wrong way?
Well, it seems like Carter was much more active in international affairs and humanitarian work than many former presidents. He wasn't content with just giving speeches or attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He was really actively involved in trying to make a difference in the world, even if it meant challenging the status quo or criticizing U.S. foreign policy.
So he wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Not at all. He saw it as his duty to speak out against injustice and work for peace, even if it meant disagreeing with a sitting president, for example. He actively lobbied against the first Gulf War, which obviously didn't sit well with President George H.W. Bush at the time.
So while he had this incredible friendship with Ford, his relationship with the broader President's Club was much more complicated. He was willing to break from the pack and follow his own conscience, even if it meant making enemies along the way.
It's a fascinating contrast. On one hand, this deep personal bond with Ford, rooted in their shared experiences, mutual understanding. And on the other hand, this willingness to challenge the establishment and go his own way, even if it meant alienating some of his fellow presidents.
It makes you wonder about the purpose of the President's Club itself. Is it meant to be a support system, a place for camaraderie, or a platform for continued political influence? Maybe it's all of those things, or maybe it evolves depending on the personalities and priorities of the presidents involved.
That's a great point. Maybe it's not this monolithic entity with like a rule book or something, but more like this fluid dynamic shaped by the individuals who make up its ranks. And Carter's experience seems to highlight those shifting dynamics more than most. I think what we're seeing here with Carter is that the President's Club isn't some monolithic entity with, a set of rules or something like that. It's more like this constantly evolving dynamic shaped by the personalities and priorities of those involved. And that makes it all the more interesting to explore how other presidents navigated these relationships.
So if Carter's experience highlights the potential for both deep connection and friction, are there other examples where presidents, despite their political differences, managed to find common ground or even forge genuine friendships?
Oh, absolutely. History is full of examples where presidents from opposite sides of the aisle found ways to work together, offer advice, even build lasting bonds. It's almost like the shared experience of holding that office creates a unique kind of understanding, a bond that transcends partisan politics.
I think that's what makes this topic so fascinating. We often hear about the bitter rivalries and political clashes. But these examples of cooperation and camaraderie offer a refreshing counterpoint. It's a reminder that even in the most divisive of times, human connection and respect can still prevail.
One of the most striking examples involves Lyndon B. Johnson and Dwight D. Eisenhower, 2 presidents from different parties, different generations, very different styles of leadership. Yet Johnson deeply valued Eisenhower's counsel. often seeking his advice on matters of state.
He even referred to Eisenhower as his best chief of staff, which is pretty remarkable considering Eisenhower was a Republican. It speaks volumes about the level of trust and mutual respect they had for each other.
And it highlights how these relationships could extend beyond mere courtesy or formality. They could become genuine sources of support and guidance even across party lines.
It's like having access to this exclusive network of mentors who understand the pressures and complexities of the presidency like no one else can. I imagine that kind of insight would be invaluable, especially for a newly elected president.
Exactly. And those connections could also manifest in more unexpected ways. There's that famous story of Ronald Reagan coaching Bill Clinton on how to give a proper military salute. Imagine that. The Hollywood actor turned president giving pointers to a young up-and-coming Democrat.
It's those little details that really humanize these larger-than-life figures, you know? It reminds us that they weren't just political robots, but individuals with their own quirks and senses of humor. It also speaks to a willingness to share knowledge and experience across party lines.
Exactly. And that openness to learning from those who came before, even those from a different political party. It's a theme we see repeated throughout history. Clinton, for example, sought counsel from Richard Nixon on foreign policy matters, drawing on the former president's experience and expertise, despite the shadow of the Watergate scandal.
That must have been a controversial move at the time. Did it pay off for Clinton in terms of his foreign policy approach?
That's a really interesting question. On the one hand, you could argue that Nixon, for all his flaws, possessed a deep understanding of geopolitics and international relations. His insights could have been valuable to Clinton, especially in navigating the post-Cold War world.
But on the other hand, seeking advice from someone so closely associated with scandal and abuse of power could have been seen as ethically questionable, potentially undermining Clinton's own credibility.
Right. There's definitely a tension there. It speaks to the complex calculations presidents have to make, balancing the potential benefits of expertise and experience against the potential political and ethical costs.
It seems like there's always this balancing act between pragmatism and principle, especially when it comes to presidential relationships.
Absolutely. And perhaps no relationship better exemplifies that balancing act than the one that developed between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush after their fiercely contested 1992 election. They went from rivals on the campaign trail to genuine friends, bonding over golf, boating, time spent together at the Bush family compound in Maine.
It's a classic example of how shared experiences, even the heat of a presidential campaign, can sometimes forge unexpected bonds. They clearly developed a genuine affection for each other that transcended their political differences.
And that spirit of collaboration extended beyond their personal relationship. When George W. Bush took office, he called upon his father and Clinton to lead a fundraising effort for countries devastated by the 2004 tsunami.
That bipartisan partnership was incredibly effective, raising millions of dollars in aid and demonstrating the power of presidential collaboration, especially in times of crisis.
And it set a precedent for future collaborations. They teamed up again for Hurricane Katrina relief efforts, proving that they could put aside their political differences and work together for the greater good.
It's almost like the weight of the office. The understanding of the challenges and responsibilities that come with it creates a common ground that transcends partisan politics.
Right. It's as if the President's Club itself becomes this kind of unifying force, reminding them that they're part of something bigger than themselves, a shared legacy that transcends their individual presidencies.
But didn't that sense of unity and cooperation take a hit during the Trump presidency? From what I recall, he had a much more adversarial relationship with former presidents, particularly those from the opposing party.
That's true. The presidency of Donald Trump marked a distinct departure from this tradition of camaraderie and cooperation. He often publicly criticized former presidents and seemed to relish in stoking political divisions rather than seeking common ground.
It's like he viewed the presidency as this zero-sum game, where any perceived slight or criticism had to be met with an equally forceful counterattack. There was very little room for nuance or respect for those who held the office before him.
Yeah, his comment about Jimmy Carter being happy that Biden was president, because it made Carter look good by comparison, is a prime example of that approach. It was a dismissive and somewhat mean-spirited remark that lacked the grace and respect we've seen in other presidential interactions.
It's a stark contrast to the warmth and mutual admiration that characterized relationships like Carter and Ford or Clinton and Bush. It makes you wonder if the President's Club, as we've come to understand it, can even survive in such a polarized and hyper-partisan political environment.
That's a really important question. Has the nature of the presidency and the political landscape surrounding it changed so dramatically that the dynamics of the President's Club are fundamentally altered?
Or are there still glimmers of hope? Examples of presidents finding ways to connect and cooperate despite their differences. After all, even Trump acknowledged Carter's efforts to improve American lives in his statement upon Carter's death.
Right. Even in the midst of political clashes and personal animosity, there can be these moments of recognition and respect. And we've seen more recent examples of presidents finding common ground despite their political differences. Barack Obama and George W. Bush, for instance, have cooperated on occasion. And Bush has developed a particularly warm relationship with Michelle Obama.
It's like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that even in our increasingly divided world, human connection and empathy can still bridge the partisan divide.
And it raises a crucial question for you to consider. Do these examples of presidential collaboration and personal diplomacy offer a blueprint for how we can navigate our own increasingly polarized world?
That's a thought-provoking question. If presidents with such differing viewpoints and political backgrounds can find ways to connect, collaborate, and even form genuine friendships, maybe there's hope for us to do the same in our own communities and interactions.
Perhaps the President's Club, for all its complexities and contradictions, offers a valuable lesson in bridging divides and finding common ground. It's a reminder that despite our differences, we can still find ways to connect as human beings, to recognize our shared humanity, and to work together for a better future.
It's interesting how these examples show that the President's Club, it's not just about backroom deals or political maneuvering. It's a glimpse into the human side of these larger-than-life figures, the pressures they faced, the bonds they formed, the lessons they learned along the way.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that these are individuals who experience the immense weight of leadership, the triumphs, the failures, the constant scrutiny that comes with holding the highest office in the land.
It makes you wonder what advice they might offer to their successors, what wisdom they might impart based on their own time in the Oval Office.
Well, I think the most valuable lesson we can glean from these presidential relationships is the importance of seeking common ground, recognizing that even amidst deep political divides, there's always room for dialogue, understanding, and even friendship.
It's a powerful message, especially in today's world where political polarization seems to be on the rise. If these presidents, with their vastly different ideologies and political agendas, could find ways to connect and collaborate, maybe there's hope for the rest of us to do the same.
Absolutely. And it's not just about finding common ground on policy issues. It's about recognizing the humanity in those we disagree with, understanding their perspectives, building bridges of empathy and respect.
And maybe, just maybe, by embracing that spirit of collaboration and understanding, we can create a more civil and productive political discourse, one where differences are respected and solutions are sought through dialogue rather than division.
You know, this deep dive has really shed light on the complexities of the presidency and the unique bonds that can form between those who've held that office.
It's like we've been given this rare glimpse behind the curtain, a chance to see these iconic figures, not just as presidents, but as people.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that leadership. It isn't just about wielding power or enacting policies. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, and finding ways to work together, even when it's difficult.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, regardless of our political affiliations or ideologies, and that at the end of the day, the most effective leaders are those who can bridge divides, build consensus, and inspire others to work towards a common goal.
So the next time you see those formal photos of presidents lined up, take a moment to think about the conversations they might have had, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned. Perhaps their example can inspire us to approach our own interactions with a little more empathy, understanding, and a willingness to find common ground.
We've only scratched the surface of this fascinating topic today, but hopefully this deep dive has piqued your interest to explore further. Dig into the biographies, the letters, the historical accounts. You might be surprised by the unlikely pairings and moments of genuine connection that you discover.
And remember, these presidents weren't just figures in a textbook. They were people who navigated the complexities of leadership, the weight of history, and yes, even the need for friendship and understanding.
So as you continue to learn and explore, keep in mind the human side of history, the stories behind the headlines, and the enduring power of connection, even in the face of political differences.